Hey everyone, this is another BookTube channel, and today I'll be reviewing Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke and Other Misfortunes by Eric LaRocca. So this is a horror novella collection. I feel like there's been a lot more of those lately. I don't know if maybe I just wasn't noticing them before, but I feel like I've seen a lot of these small hardcover novellas in the horror section at Barnes & Noble lately. I got burned by one of them last year when I bought Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. That book was absolutely horrible. Nevertheless, I decided to give this book a shot, even though it's another author that I am not familiar with. But a few things stood out to me. One, the title is great. Things have gotten worse since we last spoke. What does that, what does that mean? What's going to be in here? Where'd we pull that quote from? Very just evocative title. I love the design, the actual art on the cover. I think is really great. And there's a just pull quote from one of my favorite horror authors, Paul Tremblay, on the cover. He calls it unflinching. So no flinching in this book here. So those three things said, all right, let me give this a shot. There was a 50% off the hardcover sale at Barnes & Noble at the beginning of the year. So I figured, why not? And I was very pleasantly surprised with this book, although pleasant isn't really a word that I would put with any of these stories, which were quite horrific and sometimes disturbing. So there are actually three stories in here, two that I would classify as proper novellas, and one is just more of a short story. The first is the title story, Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. That's the story of a woman who is on an LGBTQ plus community board trying to sell an antique item. And she ends up striking up a conversation with a potential buyer. Things get personal, and then things get intimate, and then things get weird. And it just kind of spirals out of control from there. The second story is called The Enchantment. That's a story about a husband and wife who have unfortunately lost their son to suicide, and the husband, kind of like in The Shining, has taken a job as a hotel caretaker, but rather than being in the mountains of Colorado, it's an island resort, like a secluded island, and they are stuck there trying to basically make their marriage work because it was their son's last wish that they remain together. The third story in here is called You'll Find It's Like That All Over. It's the story of two neighbors that don't really get along. The older of the two neighbors invites the other one over to basically take part in a series of bets that get increasingly difficult, and they eventually culminate in one that is potentially fatal. So, up front, I want to issue trigger warnings for some of the content in here. I don't usually do that, but reading this one, I felt like, ooh, this one I really think it's kind of necessary. So I mentioned one earlier, suicide is in here, violence towards kids and animals, which I know can be very sensitive for some people, and one that I would have particularly liked to know ahead of time that I am calling pregnancy horror. Now, what's funny is, that's relative, but what's funny is pregnancy horror comes up not once, but twice in two of these three short stories. In fact, the first two short stories have a lot in common. I mentioned the first story, Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, is about a kind of chat room friendship romance that ends up going a little bit too far. It is very much a story about extreme, desperation for a connection with another person, and the lengths that some people who are feeling like an outsider or othered, the lengths that they'll go to just to connect with somebody, to find someone who cares about them, to find someone who's going to take care of them. It's a really sad story. I think it is actually the weakest one in the book. It's still pretty good, but there is a portion of it that I found particularly disturbing that outlines a crucifixion, and it just... I'm thinking of the whole story in retrospect, and I just don't see what that description had to do with anything. So I had a little bit of trouble with that. But another common theme between the two is the theme of maternity and religion. Like I said, there's a crucifixion in here. There's also a crucifixion in the second story, oddly enough. And in both stories, motherhood is a pretty dominant feature. Obviously, in the second one, where the wife, her son has taken his own life, she is extremely disconnected now. So she wishes to once again reclaim a connection to a child, and she's missing that maternal feeling. She's missing being able to be a mother. And in the first story, the main character also has a similar wish. She hasn't lost a child, but she is very desperate to have one, and she wishes that she could also have that. She wants the connection of a child, she wants the connection of a partner, she wants all of these connections. And both of these stories twist those themes to just see how far would someone be willing to go, and how severe can we take these. And while we're on that, I think both of those stories, actually all three of these stories really, will be criticized by people who probably have a similar criticism about a lot of horror movies. The most common thing that you hear when people criticize horror movies is, the characters made stupid decisions. They made bad choices. Why'd they go in the basement? Why did they do this? And I think that's missing the point of horror. The point of horror isn't why they go in the basement, it's what's in the basement. It's getting us there. Authors and filmmakers, they're telling us a scary story to show us something scary, but it's like improv, where if someone suggests a scenario to you, you can't just say no, because that would end the scene, or that would end the book or the story or the movie. In order for there to be a story, you have to say yes. You have to say yes and let's go. You have to buy into it and just kind of accept that they went into the basement because they had to go to the basement, because that's where the story is. So that's the type of stuff that this book offers. That's the type of horror here. Those are the type of situations. So if you find yourself easily irritated by characters in horror stories who are doing things that you wouldn't do in those situations, or that you think that you wouldn't do in those situations, you might be irritated by this. But if you just enjoy a horror story because you like to let it play out and you want the author to be able to tell you what they want to tell you, I think you're going to have a pretty good time with this. I do think that the third story is a little bit weaker as well, just because I think the theme there of constantly trying to remain, on people's good side, or to always remain cordial with someone despite, not getting along or not seeing eye to eye. I think it's a little bit labored, but it's a short story. It's only about, I think 25 pages, or even maybe a little bit longer than that compared to the other ones. But it's an okay theme. I don't think it's as strong as those themes of connection and motherhood and religion that are going through the first two stories, but it's a good enough story. Another big positive for this book is you can read it in a day, and I know that because I read it in a day. The first story, the Things Have Gotten Worse story, is literally able to be read in 30 minutes because it's in the format of emails and instant messages. So the text just flies by. There's not extraneous descriptions. There's not anything like that, because it is literally like transcripts of the two conversations. So you can read it very, very quickly. And the other story is also, pretty short. About half the book is the first story, and then the other half of the book are the next two. Again, they're just short. They're very easy to pick up and read. I got through editing this whole video, and then I realized that I really forgot to talk about the second story, The Enchantment, which was my favorite story in the entire book. So that one, just real quick, one of the reasons it was my favorite, I really just loved the dynamic of the husband and wife. I thought that their struggle with, coming to terms with what happened to them and where they are in their relationship, it just really rang true. I just thought it was really strongly written and very believable. And everything that happens to them on the island, I thought was consistently surprising and interesting, and I never felt disappointed by it. And the ending, even though it's a little ambiguous, I didn't find to be like a cheat or anything. So I just thought that was a really good story. If I had to assign an arbitrary and subjective grade to this very long titled book, I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. It's just short of like great, but it is better than good. So I would definitely recommend it if you enjoy horror. If you've read it already, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. Thank you for spending some time with me today, but now it's time to get back to reading.